Hello, my name is John Reynolds. I'm Vice Chairman of the Executive Committee of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. The tape you're about to see are highlights taken and edited by Ralph Mueller of the British Columbia Legislature on a trip that a number of us took to South Africa. You'll see President de Klerk, Mr. Bothelezi, and others, Mr. Mandela. I hope you enjoy the tape, and special thanks to Ralph Mueller from the British Columbia Legislature for the great job that he's done in editing this tape.
I'm a parliamentarian at heart. I started my parliamentary career in 1973. The one bad thing about the position of state president is he's no longer a member of the legislature.
It is the first time in 30 years that the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association has visited South Africa, and all of us who are delegates from the various Commonwealth parliaments from around the world believe that we may be able to offer some help and assistance should you need it or feel that there is anything that we can do.
Thank you also for the offer of assistance. Obviously there are all sorts of international agencies, if I can put it that way, available. You operate on the parliamentary level with vast experience in your association, and there are many other institutes also offering help and assistance. On the question of constitution making, we have chosen the route of negotiation between all the parties, political parties in this country, whether it be big or small, with a proven base of support. There is much too much the perception that it is a question of an arrangement between the government and the ANC. The government and the ANC are major role players. There are other fairly big parties, noticeably so in Qatar, which is also an important role player. But there are a number of other parliamentarian parties representing substantial numbers of people. In some instances, as many as you have people in some of the countries of the members of the Commonwealth. So it must be a multi-party conference. We have therefore decided against putting a model on the table. And the multi-party conference will decide on its own procedures. The government won't be, although we're constantly accused of it, won't be referee and player. The government will continue to govern in terms of the present constitution and to administer. But the new constitution, there we will participate as the national party.
De Klerk has taken bold moves as a white politician in this country, especially an Afrikaner politician, who has helped to influence the government to change direction from the point of view of policy. And we commend him for that. Where there are differences of opinion is when people imagine that the struggle against apartheid has now come to an end. That apartheid no longer exists. Apartheid is still very much alive. It's not just a question of repealing 3 laws which are regarded as the pillars of apartheid. That is a good step, and that is what we've been demanding. But the real demand by the overwhelming majority of the people in this country is the realization of the principle of one person, one vote. We are still very far from that. The day when I will be able to exercise parliament and be able to send the people of my choice to parliament are still very far. That is what the fight is about here. It's not about the repeal of the so-called pillars of apartheid. It's not about the release of political prisoners. It's not about the return of exiles. We, of course, wanted those obstacles removed. before we can sit down to negotiation. But that is not our basic demand. Our basic demand is that the vote must be given to all the people of South Africa. It is that apartheid must be dismantled in all its various manifestations. And we're still very far from that as well, because the repeal of the three laws themselves doesn't solve the problems of apartheid, because we are dealing with a vast majority of people who have no resources. No resources because of the deliberate policy of successive governments in this country. And therefore, to repeal the Land Act, the Group Areas Act, for example, which deny us facilities to get land in urban areas, is no solution if the government does not give us the capacity to take advantage of that repeal. If the government were serious, they would repeal these laws and then create facilities for us to have the cash, the capital, to buy land where we would like to buy them. And that has not been done. And the government knows very well that the danger of merely repealing the Land Act is that those who have got the resources are now in a position even to buy the little land which was reserved for blacks, because they have got the facility. And that is one thing I think you must be able to grasp. The other point is that apartheid, as far as the funding of education, housing, health facilities, social services, is still in place, because there's different funding for blacks and different funding for whites.
We are not opposed to change. It is the way that change must take notice. And can I perhaps at this stage say what can I summarize in 4 words what I think we in South Africa, my party, has in mind. It is political independence, economical interdependence. And personally, something like the European Economic EEC, something like the EEC is
within South Africa?
Within South Africa. A community of political independent nations with economic interdependence.
I see. All right, finally, just on this point, would you then, the changes that Mr. de Klerk has made and is in fact is suggesting further changes, would you say that he has gone too far, too fast?
As opposed to little too late. No, I don't think that. Yes. Mr. de Klerk, our approach as conservative people, approach is evolutionary. I think Mr. de Klerk is going to find himself with a revolution on his fingers very, very shortly. He might change, he might swap one revolution for another one. I think that might be his problem. Can I say to put it to you this way, that shortly after my party was formed, a man came to me and said to me, Mr. Langley, you can do, this Conservative Party can do almost exactly what the National Party is doing, but we will take it from you, but we won't take it from them anymore because we don't trust them. I think Mr. de Klerk's problem is that he has lost the credibility, his credibility towards firstly the Afrikaner people, and I think it's now fast extending towards the whites in general, with the Indians and the coloureds being very nervous onlookers at the moment.
The IFP believes that now is the time for us to begin negotiations. We believe that now is the time for an all-party conference. Now is the time, we believe, that all parties, political parties, however advantaged or disadvantaged they may be, to come together to see what can in fact be done. Even now, while blacks still do not have the vote, and even now, while poverty still remains supreme, and even now, while violence is prohibitively high, we need to come together now to do what can be done now, because if we do not begin now, despite the difficulties which surround us, we'll just not succeed.
You must realize that we are very sensitive against interference in our internal affairs. South Africa, and I know that you don't want to do it, South Africa is a sovereign country, its sovereignty and its independence is recognized throughout the world. We are not comparable with Namibia, which has never been a sovereign country until it attained independence now. We're not comparable with the ex-Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. We're not comparable with Angola. We have been for some 50 years a recognized sovereign country, and the constitutional process must be constitutionally done in terms of our present constitution. But that doesn't mean that we think we have all the wisdom in the world, and we are happy to open ourselves to constructive criticism and to constructive inputs. And as I say, we are making fundamental studies.
We accept the principle of one man, one vote. That's just logical. It depends on how you see South Africa. If you say South Africa is one unitary state, as the government does, then it's only logical that you should have one man, one vote.
Right.
On one common voters roll, and in the end the majority will govern. That's as simple as that. If you accept that point of departure, but you don't want the majority to simply govern, then you try constitutional tricks to prevent the majority from just governing. Then you try to prevent that. Then you come up with all kinds of checks and balances in your constitution, and you try to entrench this and 2/3 majority, whatever, to try and override the majority. That's as far as I'm concerned, that is not honest. That's unfair. If you say this is one country, as the government does, and you say we are all citizens and should have full and equal political rights, then you should have a one man, one vote election, and the majority will govern in terms of the majority's decision. We say, of course, we also accept the idea of one man, one vote, but we say this is not simply just one unitary state. You must go back into our history and see where we come from, and how we became one unitary state with one colonial boundary after we lost our independence at the end of the last century. And if you take that into consideration, then we say, yes, one man, one vote. But we are not just a society of so many individuals. We are different peoples within this one colonial unitary state. We're not just a bunch of individuals. If I speak from my own position, I'm an Afrikaner. My family came to Africa in 1685. We are the only tribe on this continent that calls ourselves to this continent, Afrikaners from Africa. My home language is Afrikaans, also called after this continent, Africa. So we are part and parcel of this. We are not simply a bunch of individuals that you now can force into one unitary state, and how you try to prevent the majority from dominating and doing things that you don't want with some kind of constitutional trick. And that's a problem.
Do you feel that de Klerk is sincere in his efforts, that he wants to bring about that one person, one vote, full democracy? Is he sincere in that?
Well, it is really not a question of the sincerity of any man, even though he may be the head of state. What is important to determine our own strategy and tactics is the policy of the party which he represents.
National Party.
He represents the National Party, and the National Party has brought about the most brutal form of racial oppression in this country. And it is still applying that policy. We note the developments that have taken place, but broadly speaking, that party is an apartheid party. Now, we cannot talk about the irreversibility of the process at the present moment, because in order to be irreversible, this means that the principle of one person, one vote has been applied, because it is only when we ourselves are able to defend the gains that we have achieved that we can talk of irreversibility. When the parliament is still controlled by de Klerk and his party, they can change at any time. Secondly, we have the Conservative Party, which has vowed that when they come to power, they will be able to stop this process altogether. And their power is growing. And it is therefore unreasonable to talk, unrealistic, to talk of the process being irreversible when we ourselves are not yet in parliament to make the process irreversible, when the National Party can still change its views, when the Conservative Party can come into power and reverse the whole process.
We have a vast number of black nations, each with a different language. The Zulus, for instance, form the largest black national group. They have a king. And their attitude is that king must have a constitutional place in the future constitution. But they don't want to go separate. They don't want to become independent. But they say we must make space for their king, and they look at regionalism inter alia as an important part of the solution. There are the Shangans, the Sothos, the North Sothos, the Tswanas, the Venda, the South Sothos, the Swazis, and the Xhosas. Each of them have in some or other form, mostly in the rural areas that remains important where about 50% of all black South Africans live, some form of hereditary chieftainship, which plays an important role. We're not just the first world, we also have the typical African situation, and as in many other African countries, we will have to find compromises to accommodate this diversity. It doesn't offer any real security for small minority groups, such as the whites, the coloureds, and the Indian South Africa. But it does offer regionalism to some extent, and a good solution and security against oppression and suppression to the various black ethnic groups. Because white South Africans find themselves in a minority wherever they are.
What happens, Mr. Ingram, if you take the Zulus and the ANC and maybe even the PAC through some miracle and the clerk's government, if they do eventually get together and you don't participate in any of their conversations, and they come up with a new constitution and they put it to the people and they win the vote, would your people do that? Do you go to war?
That time will tell. It depends on how that constitution, how they put it to the people. We say that the whites have a right to decide for themselves. Our catchword is political self-determination for ourselves. And the others can have it in the way they want it. If the coloureds and the Indians and the blacks all want to pool together and form something outside us, then they can do it. But we are prepared to, as an independent white state, to form an economic community with whatever the black nation.
Who defines that boundary where you are? Like I noticed in the paper this morning, there's a school blowing up.
Yes.
And I'm not sure if it was somebody from your party, it was
No, it's not
somebody
our
else
problem. Well, it
made a
might.
comment about good.
No,
So it'll teach them not to put blacks in this school in our area. Is that kind of thing going to be happening more and more if they don't sit down and talk?
I said I'm not an instrument to it. I'm not a participant to it. But we warn that if they continue to do what they are doing at the moment, this country will make Lebanon and Northern Ireland look like a kindergarten, and I won't be able to prevent it.
In July last year, we got information that members of Inkatha were going to attack residents in a particular township in this area. Our information was accurate. We immediately informed the government about this attack. informed those departments which deal with violence. We informed the Minister of Police, the Commissioner of Police for the country, and the Regional Commissioner for this area that this attack is coming. And we indicated what weapons were being carried, would be carried by these people, and asked the authorities not to allow these people to enter this township armed. They didn't reply. We sent a second letter calling for a response from them. Then they responded and said that the police would do their duties according to the law. We were satisfied with this. On the 22nd of July, these members of Inkatha converged on this township from various directions, armed, in broad daylight. Although the police knew that this attack was going to be launched, they were not there. Members of Inkatha gathered at a particular spot. In order to go there, they said they were going to have a peace rally in this township. But it was clear that there was going to be no rally, because when there is a rally, there is evidence. There will be tables, there will be chairs, there will be a loudspeaker system. There was nothing of this sort. It was just a bare felt. When they had all collected, they just shouted a war cry, which they always shout before they attack and attack. They attacked a large area, and in that one attack killed 30 innocent residents. There was no questioning as to whether you are a member of the ANC, you are a member of Inkatha, whether you were a Xhosa or a Zulu or Sotho. They just attacked that area indiscriminately and they killed 30 people. After this, I went to City Clerk and I asked him to explain. I said to him, you knew beforehand that this attack was coming. We asked you to prevent these people from entering the township armed. The attack was launched during the day. It is clear that there was a large number of criminals involved in this attack. We want you to explain why you allowed them to come in spite of the warning. Secondly, why nobody has been arrested when such a large number of people have been engaged. After all, the South African police are very efficient. They have got very sophisticated methods of crime detection. Why is it that not a single person has been arrested? I go further to say that in any civilized country where 30 people have been slaughtered in this manner, the head of state would have come forward, issued a strong statement condemning the attack, calling for the arrest of the criminals and their prosecution, and also expressing condolences to the next of kin. Why have you not done so? He was just unable to answer the question. That is one case. If that was the only case, we would have been convinced that this government is part and parcel of this violence.
What is happening now, the essential character of violence, is that it is no longer aimed at the state. It is now between rival parties who are positioning themselves. And it is basically restricted to those who are not represented in Parliament at the moment, who are trying to position themselves as the strongest influence, representing those not represented in Parliament. And the supporters, I'm not saying the leadership, the supporters of the ANC and the supporters of Inkatha are mainly involved in the violence.
We need peace for our South African ideals. Inkatha Freedom Party is working to eradicate violence for the scourge that it is. We join in the endeavors that were initiated in the Conference on Violence and Intimidation, which the state president called into existence, who are part of the mechanisms which flowed from the conference, which are endeavoring to establish action against violence. We were part of the process which was commenced after the Pretoria Conference on Violence and Intimidation, which set about ensuring a broad-based political participation in work for peace. We are part of the facilitating committee endeavors to bring about an all-party program of action for peace. We are participating in the preparatory committee seeking to do just this. In addition to these attempts and this involvement, the African Party has already concluded negotiations with the Pan-Africanist Congress, which led to the agreement on both sides that the IFP and the PAC will meet on Friday, the 16th of August, in national executive discussions here in Ulundi.
The members of Inkatha from the hostels traveled 6 kilometers and attacked a squatters camp, killed 29 people in one wholesale attack. They spent 2 hours in this camp attacking. And at the end of 2 hours, the police arrived, didn't arrest anybody. They just collected them and escorted them back to their hostel. And then there was an outcry. Then they arrested about 6 people. And a couple of days thereafter, they released them. Now, we believe that as a result now of dissatisfaction within the government services themselves, because we are putting tremendous pressure on the government on this question, they have arrested 7 of these people. But we are aware of what has happened. We are aware of what has happened in the past. We don't think that these people are really going to be prosecuted, because they have done this on various occasions. When there is a hue and cry, then they arrest, then they release. Once it comes down, they release people quietly. And sometimes they bring them to court.
A chap walks to the cafe to buy some cigarettes. An opposing member vilifies his leaders or makes some derogatory remarks. He goes back and make up a small band of 10 chaps and say, we're going to look for that chap who vilified. And suddenly, in one instance, 4 people died as a result of an insult of an individual who went to buy some cigarettes. To say that the government, any government, can just stop that type of violence is absolutely nonsense. Yes, we can, through strong policing, and we've increased our police force by 10,000 people in 1 year, and by all sorts of steps. You can suppress it, you can control it, you can contain it. And we're doing that. Figures are coming down as well. But the real solution lies in negotiation for violence. Because the moment all the leaders sit together around the table, their followers will also start coming down and say, now they're talking to each other. So why will we continue fighting? Our leaders are talking. And therefore also the fundamental solution for the type of violence that we have at the moment lies in getting negotiation on.
So that there can be no doubt at all. What is the stand, the official stand of the ANC in respect of sanctions? Could you give a definitive statement?
Yes. Well, our stand is very clear and simple. We want sanctions to be maintained. And we are, however, aware that there are very serious cracks in the war. And we must therefore be realistic. And we are changing our strategy. And in order to accommodate this new development that is taking place. And we are saying we should now offer a plan in terms of which sanctions can be lifted in phases.
Yeah.
Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And that sanctions like air links, tourism, sports boycotts, the release, the obstacles to negotiations. Those sanctions relating to this could be lifted if we are able to remove these obstacles. Once these obstacles are removed, then this particular group of sanctions, like tourism, like airlines, can be lifted. Then if we have a constituent assembly, then we'll be able to lift another group of sanctions, like diplomatic sanctions.